We were talking about CONMEBOL and what's going on with the two matches coming up today, tomorrow, and then on Tuesday with Nino, and how his beloved Peru is at the bottom of the table, and they are chasing after that 7 spot. And so it was a quite involved conversation about what's going on. When you're looking at qualifiers this week and next, what's sticking to your mind with your favorite club?
They have to continue to build out of the momentum they gained and the play they showed during Copa America. Colombia at times gets a little triumphalist and they get a little bit too complacent when they've done well. And I hope that they don't do that and that they go into this qualifiers showing that the type of play, it's going to be just as entertaining, dominant, and effective as it has been. Obviously, the rematch with Argentina is a big deal, so that's the biggest game of this particular week for Colombia. Peru's always tough. I mean, regardless of where they're at, I think Peru, Venezuela, no matter in what form they're in, they always give Colombia some issues. It's exciting to see Cucho Hernandez be called up. I think that he's a guy that has been overlooked almost his whole career by Colombia. He's been called up a couple of times, but hasn't really been a protagonist. It's tough. It's tough in Colombia because you got so many good players. You got so many good attackers. Sinestera, Luis Diaz. You got Cordova. You have so many options up there that it's tough for Cucho. But I really hope that he's not just called up to be called up and sit on the bench. I hope that he gets some minutes. So that's probably the biggest thing on my mind is hoping that Cucho, who is a friend of the show, who's a great guy and someone who's so passionate and involved with everything involved in soccer, I really hope that he does well. But it's going to be interesting how Nestor Lorenzo in Colombia take their first game after being second in Copa America, which is no small deal.
Yep, minus 141 against Niko's Colombia, minus 141 going up against Nino's Peru at a plus 418. So now that we've got that transition, let's talk Major League Soccer. Nick, first thought in your head for Niko this morning.
All right, so Niko, I've got some challenges going on here in Atlanta, and maybe you can help me with. So starting with the changes that have been going on here, Carlos Bocanegra out, Garth for the moment running the show until a new general manager is named. I have questions because I think what Garth considers swinging for the fences and what the Atlanta fan base may consider swinging for the fences may be two radically different things. And Garth says, trust me, I know what I'm doing here. My question is asking someone who is well tied to Seattle culture, well tied to the Sounders culture. How much support did Garth have in Seattle when that squad was really running things in this league? How much say so? How much input did Garth have, or was there a large sort of support structure around him?
That's a great question. I am not going to sit here and discredit the fantastic team that Garth had here. And we'll probably get to talking about the other guy that was next to him at some point today. I kind of came along with that idea. Yeah. But what I will say is that Garth Lagerwey was the man with the biggest voice. He's the guy that had the plans. He's the guy that honestly did things that now are and continue to be a positive in the organization, even when results on the MLS side are not great at the time. But just to go off of one, it's just how much money and how much effort and how much involvement he had with boosting the academy in the youth system. And that was his call, and he put so much into it. And now you have so many players coming in and being a part of the first team. I would say that when it comes to negotiations, he was the man up front. He was the guy that was fighting for the Roman Torreses, that was going out there and making sure that things got done with the Raul Ruidíazes. I mean, when it comes to being a dog on the negotiating table, I mean, he was the man. So it was a balance, and we'll just go ahead and say the name. Chris Henderson, you've heard me talk about. He's the Starkey to his Hutch, and you know, it's really something that worked fantastically. They have back-to-back birthdays. They are yin and yang. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, it was amazing the way those two worked together here. That, along with Sean Henderson and a whole bunch of other components that were part of that team here in the organization. But what I will say is that if you are doubting Garth Lagerwey, just look at his track record and look at what he's done, and look at his ability to even scout, and if not scout, decide on the right players with the intangibles, with the right stuff, not going for the guy with the name and the highlights, and no, he goes for a guy that's going to come in and be a difference maker. I mean, was there small players that came in and were not amazing? Sure. But if there was something always true about Garth Lagerwey, is that with that DP spot, he wasn't missing, baby. He would tell me, Niko, this is like a first-round draft pick for an NFL team. And he never missed. And that's what's important for him to do when he's in charge. I think he'll do it. I think he'll make the right choice at the coaching department for Atlanta. I think he'll make the right choice with the two DP spots he promised and said that they would not go into 2025 without filling. I believe him.
Okay.
Garth Lagerwey has always been a guy that holds to his word. So I do believe him. I do trust him. And he was a huge part of the success here in Seattle. He was a huge part of the success that RSL had. I just think that his track record speaks for itself.
Okay, because in Atlanta, when we consider the track record, for us, it's also the past couple of years that Garth has been here, that the results have been far from what we have wanted anyway. And with Chris Henderson, it's hard to tease apart in Miami because you have such a cult of personality around Messi and all the players who want to go. Before Messi showed up, Miami was mid, I think is being generous, but they were a very mid team. So it's hard for people in Atlanta to buy into, hey, look at the track record in Seattle. We know what we're doing. So that's exactly why I asked you that question, because it's hard for us to buy into that.
And that's great context, because when it comes to that, I mean, you guys got to understand that Garth Lagerwey was not brought in to be a GM or a sporting director. I mean, he was brought in to do something beyond soccer. So he comes in, has to adapt to a new role, has to understand away from the soccer component. He has to do a whole bunch of other things. He has to not rock the boat and give a guy that to me should have been gone a long time ago, like Carlos Bocanegra, the benefit of the doubt. You want to make sure that maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was the structure around him. Right. He has to remove pieces. He has to get rid of the dead weight that Atlanta had. I mean, Atlanta had done things wrong for so many years that you can't just expect the guy to come in and just change it. Same thing as a president of a country. If things have been bad for 4 years, he's not going to change it in 1, 2, or 3. You got to give him that extra time. As a GM, he always said that 3 years is about how long it takes for him to flip a roster. At his new position, he has to do a lot more. So it's I understand the frustration for Atlanta, because, and this is not a Garth thing, this is the Atlanta United thing, that they started so red hot, so on top. They have this amazing building, these incredible fans. They have all of these star players, Almiron and Martinez, and it's beautiful and it's amazing. It's the greatest show on turf, whatever you want to call it. And then it's a decline, and you're in the doghouse, and you can't get things right, and you bring a whole bunch of coaches that should have never been there, and that didn't match the system, that they didn't match the players, and you spend a whole bunch of money on players that were busts. So all of that affects everything for the future. So I'm asking you guys to really understand the fact that he's not out here just cutting kids' hairs. I mean, that is a huge responsibility. There's so many components, and he himself was not able to just do the soccer component. He had to worry about other things. So it takes even more time. So I think he'll choose the right guy when it comes to the guy below him. I think he'll choose the right guy when it comes to the coaching staff. And I think that he will bring two immediate, impactful players for Atlanta United.
How much did analytics play into Garth when he was on the GM side of things? Because now as a president and CEO, he's over in the day-to-day operations. He's over here. When he was on the player activation side and the player acquisition side, how big was analytics in his DNA when he was there in Seattle?
Oh, it was big. And I want to say Ravi was one of the guys that was at the time here handling things like that. And I mean, they had a whole team that he's always been the type of guy that regardless of where he's at in the chain of command or the totem pole, whatever you want to call it, he's always going to give the specialist in the area the ability to have a big influence on the topic. So data was a huge thing for them. It was part of the reason why I believe that they were successful at bringing in guys that maybe other teams were overlooking. The Gustav Svenssons, the Kim Ki-hees, the players that maybe were free agents. And now, again, I don't want to take any credit away from Chris and Sean, but I think Garth Lagerwey, his ability to build a roster, his ability to understand things as simple as keeping Brian Smetzer because it was working, that tells you everything that you need to know about Garth Lagerwey. So when it comes to data, I do believe that it's a big part of his overall thought process. And he's always going to allow the guys that are specialists on it to be a big influence on whatever decision gets made.
Nick, go for it.
All right. Yeah. See, this is, and before you came on, John gave me some time where I laid out all of my concerns. Right. So, and that's why I ask the questions that I ask, because I think things have been going wrong here for such a period of time. And I do respect the fact that, we had a run of injuries. I don't know if you've been keeping up, during that time period, we lost Guzan to like a Achilles injury. We had it seemed like every other week a new player was dropping, and we had to make a bunch of rushed contract signings that frankly did not work out. And so that's been clear now. And so it's hard for me to buy into the analytics model because, we've seen where the analytics model has gone wrong before. So I think this is a bit of a new ground for us here, because Atlanta's a city that it is an entertainment capital, which means that we need sizzle with the steak. It's not just get a win, but it's like how you win is also important. And so that is why I think there's, a lot of concern with what, Garth has said here. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I appreciate what you said though, because from the outside looking in, when you see certain sports markets, us on the outside look in and say, okay, it looks like it's a conglomerate sort of running Seattle. Like there's not one clear person running the show. It's sort of like by committee, but now we're hearing that that's not necessarily the case from somebody who's inside that market. So I think it's good to hear your perspective on it as well, because maybe it helps somebody who's listening to the show kind of, release some of the tension and concern. Some people, maybe not, but I appreciate what you've brought to the table from that perspective.
Yeah, I'll close with this, man. Look, I think Garth is brilliant, but I think he's also a great people person and somebody that can gauge a structure and keep what's working and get rid of what's not. It would have been very easy for Garth to come in and kick Bocanegra as soon as he got there. if he had the sort of power, and I believe he did, and change it up and bring his own guys and all of these things. But he needed to see what was working and what was not. So it's not about rushing into something. It's about using all the resources. It's about trying to keep what's working and then getting rid of what's not. And I think that talks to what Garth Lagerwey does. I go back to the Brian Spencer thing. Brian was not Garth Lagerwey's guy. If Garth could have done it, he would have brought in another coach. But it's working. The guys are buying in. Things are going in the right direction. He lets him be interim head coach. He stays that head coach. Things continue to work. You give him resources. You give him everything. And you have the greatest era in Sounder history. That talks about Garth Lagerwey. He doesn't have to put his stamp on everything. He's just going to assess it. And I think that's what happened in Atlanta at an even different level because he's dealing with so many more things than just soccer-related subjects.
So then now that Garth is on the executive side and there are 2 openings that are key openings. I mean, this is Garth now putting his stamp on this organization going forward because he's looking for a GM. It is a global search with MLS experience. That's what he's looking at for a general manager. The coach, don't know if, it's going to be, you're going to have a simultaneous coach search where Garth, as the interim general manager, is going to be putting his stamp on that as well. We were trying to look at those with worldwide experience that are either in MLS now that have worked their way into Major League Soccer. Came up with a couple of names, but obviously when Tom Bogert puts Chris Henderson's name out there and explains an anecdote about his current situation, whether or not, it was someone else telling Chris, okay, that, Son Leahy wants your office, or Son Leahy's like, I'm taking your office. Like I said, we don't know that. We have context of an anecdote involving Chris Henderson and Mr. Son Leahy right now in soccer operations down there at Inter Miami. What kind of an individual is Chris when it comes to his own operating style? Because he went into a situation in Miami where they thought that 5 equaled 3 when it came to designated players. He had to go in and clean up a mess. He cleaned up the mess, and now he's been able to navigate the cap, bring in the Gulfstream Galacticos, bring in Messi, navigate, sell DeAndre Yedlin for a weird AM, bring in all these players and navigate, bring in Redondo at prorated numbers. What kind of, when you think of Chris Henderson as a manager and that GM side of things, what comes to mind? How does he operate, and what kind of a guy is Chris Henderson?
I think he's the perfect balance of someone who understands MLS, is perfectly networked in the best leagues in the world, whether it's South America, Europe. I think he's the guy that is going to come in with this super cool vibe, like, you might see it in a movie, and the glows around him, and he can just manage and get things done his way. When it comes to scouting, he's fantastic as well. I think that's why he works so well with Garth. I believe that when he came to the budget and the salary cap, Garth was always the guy that was doing all those things. And then when he came to bringing in a variety, a gambit of players, everything started with Chris. And that's exactly why I think they work so well. If there's something interesting about Chris, is that he's kind of changed a little bit compared to the guy he was here. And that's what maybe I buy into the fact that when you hear, is Chris Henderson going to leave Inter Miami, which sounds like a perfect situation, I don't know if it is. I don't know if Chris Henderson, the guy who here was either the next phase of that operation, to kind of being a guy that we know what he's doing in Inter Miami, but the David Beckhams, the Moss brothers, those are the guys that kind of get a lot of the credit and the headlines. And even Tata Martino is a guy that, so-and-so came, Redondo came, and they were able to get Diego Gomez because of Tata, not because of Chris Henderson. So because of that, although Chris Henderson is not a guy that's looking for the spotlight, I do believe that he's a prideful person because he puts in a lot of work. You want me to tell you what was another incredible thing about Chris Henderson? His hustle. Regardless of being up there in the totem pole, he was a hustler. He was getting up, first guy in the office, last guy leaving it, no stone unturned, getting every single option possibility available looked at. That was a lot of his game. And that's exactly why I believe that he's a workaholic that will change and turn around a sinking ship like in Miami was into the brand new cruise of the South Coast, right? I mean, it's beautiful in Florida right now because of a guy like Chris Henderson at Inter Miami. So he's the sort of guy that I feel like would be willing to get away from what seems like a perfect situation right now and maybe go to a place like Atlanta where he's going to really be the face of the operation, especially with Garth Lagerwey more on the executive side. That would be a perfect situation, to be quite honest. But that's who Chris Henderson is. He's a guy that, especially with the right resources, he'll bring you whatever you want. Look, it was interesting when Chris went to Inter Miami, Leonardo Campana, Gregory, a whole bunch of guys that came in. Those were guys that Chris was looking at here in Seattle, that he went after, that in the negotiating table things fell off. But over there is a little bit different. So he has the resources. I feel like in Atlanta, he has the resources and he has this great, I mean, it's not Miami, right? In terms of like living situation, but in the soccer spectrum, woo, I mean, that's a great place. The vibes, everything about it. So, man, I see what you guys are laying out, and I'm following right along with it. And I think everybody in MLS and everyone looking at the situation says, wow, if Chris Henderson wants to go to Atlanta, it'd be the perfect situation.
Wow. Okay. Nick, what's going on?
No, I look, that's I've asked my questions,
Okay.
right? Because I was Captain Negativity for the first part. And I asked my questions. I've heard what I wanted to. I heard what I wanted to hear. Now, I will sit back and observe. That will be because I have a more limited window of Garth Lagerwey than what Niko has. Mm-hmm. My take on Garth Lagerwey is, so far, I've seen a whole lot of chatter and not a whole lot of action, right? Now, if Niko, and I trust Niko, one, as a journalist, I trust Niko as a voice of reason. So if Niko's telling me, look, you got to look beyond this window, I'm willing to do that because what Niko brings to the table is a respected voice in his community. So I'm willing to listen to what Niko's saying, and I will sit to the side and say, okay, we'll give this, let this process play out and see how it shakes. So I'm, there's no, but there's no, however, I'm just going to sit back and let the process play out and take Niko, and respect what Niko's saying.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Niko, you had mentioned earlier in our conversation that it was almost a 3-year turnaround to get from point A to a desired point B. So we're halfway through that discussion right now with Garth having been here for 18 months on the executive side of things.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, that was from him, regardless of walking into a better situation, because in Seattle, he had a guy like Chris Henderson that wasn't just putting money in a big pile and setting it on fire like it was in Atlanta. So obviously it was easier to get there, but the 3-year turnaround, it's a real thing.
All right. You and I had been talking about news in the Pacific Northwest. Are you going to tease news in the Pacific Northwest, or are you going to break news in the Pacific Northwest?
Man, I wish I could break them, but I literally got on with my editor and I just asked about it. And there is a story coming out here in Seattle, just simply about Raul Ruidiaz's situation. We can get into a lot of other things when it comes to the Sounders, because obviously they're in a tough position, and looking at the end part of the schedule, it's not as easy as it once looked. So we can take a look at that. But yes, definitely Way Sounder our heart. We're going to have a big story dropping this morning about Raul Ruidiaz and his situation with the Seattle Sounders.
Okay, so speaking of which, handful of teams have decided that, we don't need the international break and we got to catch up on matches. And so, of course, Seattle has a trip to Columbus to take on Crew. Gee, thanks.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Look, Columbus is out 6 players, so I guess it's a good situation for Seattle. No Cucho. Russell Rowe has been called up. Obviously, both goalkeepers have been called up. I mean, that's a lot of Farsi won't be there either. So that's a lot of good players that won't be part of a Columbus Crew team that I think if me and you were to go out there, we all of a sudden will find magic at our feet because that's what Wilfred Nancy can inspire. But at the same time, Seattle needs to win. Seattle, it's beyond hunger. I think that there's a necessity for them to show something, right? The Portland game was like watching paint dry and nothing really worked well. I think that Georgie Manungu was the most entertaining player on the field, and he came on in the second half. He was a Tacoma Defiance guy that was just signed, that has that eye of the tiger at the moment, and he was fantastic. But aside from that, not a lot went well. Brian Spencer talked about Pedro La Vega at times doing a lot because he feels the need to just show what he hasn't been able to because of injuries, so doing a little too much. Nuhu and some of his issues defensively. So Seattle really needs this win. I think that there's a lot more problematics that you might see. Look, I'm going to go ahead and at least give you something. Leo Chu has been relegated really because, and there's nothing negative about when you have to discipline a player, but I don't want to call it discipline because that's not what it is. But it does seem like there is a doubt on how much effort Leo Chu's putting in and how impactful he can be. And so we asked Brian Smetzer because, look, he pointed at an injury for the reason why Leo Chu was not in the 18 against Portland. And he mentioned an injury that we never saw, that wasn't in the injury report, that as much as I try to find and dig, no one told me he was injured. And so Brian kind of mentioned a situation where the player said he felt something and he stopped doing a drill for like a warm-up, but then he came back in. So it sounded like in between the lines, he was saying, look, man, if you're going to act like you have an injury or you're not feeling this exercise and you're going to come back in, I'm going to take you out of your word, man, and I'm not going to play you in the game when you're not kind of giving me 100. So this is me speculating, but if you go back and you look at what Brian Smetzer said about it, he gives you some room for, taking it your own way. So this locker room has had issues. Nuhu, Raul were both disciplined or there was an internal issue. It mattered that was at hand. Leo has been just off the charts and hasn't really been part of the team. He's showed displeasure. I think JP we've seen come off a lot of times upset and angry. I think that there's a lot of holes and a lot of problematics. There's been more evidence of turmoil that I've ever remember seeing with the Sounders team. So how they can fix that or harness that as the season ends could potentially put him in the playoffs or put him off. Because right now, Seattle has they have their own future in their hands. Every team they play here on out is above them. So they got to win. They got to get some points. But if they don't, then they'll quickly find themselves out of the playoffs, man. And there are teams that are below them, like Dallas, that, as I mentioned last week, they're getting good players back. They're looking a little better. Colorado looks good. I mean, there's just a lot going on for a Seattle team that if they don't make the playoffs, man, I think that there's no way that Brian Smetzer stays in charge, that there isn't huge changes coming up. So I think this last spell of games for the Seattle Sounders are even more important than you might think.
All right, other matchups that we've got. There's 5 others. Revs at home, plus 112 hosting all caps. Red Bulls at a minus 156 hosting Sporting Kansas City, who's basically a plus 400. Chicago Fire at a plus 104, hosting DC United at a plus 239. So Fire, a prohibitive favorite at home, still on the plus side. Houston hosting LAFC at a plus 106. LAFC is a plus 231 on the road. And then the late game, Vancouver hosting FC Dallas, even money plus 100. FC Dallas at a plus 250, draws a plus 265. What sticks in your head with those?
The LAFC, what'd you tell me? Plus what?
231.
Wow. Look, man, as much as Houston has been good and as much as they've brought in some good pieces, I think LAFC, after what happened last week, they're going to go in there, baby. They're going to go in with everything and just let Houston have it. I really do think that this is a statement game for LAFC in terms of pride, in terms of what's ahead. So I like that. And what's the compositive on goals? Because, man, I'm telling you, LAFC is going to go out there to try to tear this team apart.
All right, so your total, as it's laid out, 2.5 is a minus 155. 3.5 is a plus 158. So it changes at 3 at a plus 106. And so anything above 3 is on the plus side.
Yeah, I'll actually take. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that without a doubt. Look, the Dynamo, Lucinelli, which is terrible for a team that he was so good. He had been so good for them, and he had been a guy that gave them some very needed speed and dynamic on the left side. As much as they're a good, solid defensive team, I really do think that LAFC is going to come out there with everything, and they're going to let him have it. So I'll take LAFC, and I'll take the goals on now.
Okay, 3.5 is a plus 158. 4 is a plus 272. 4.5 is a plus 342. So that's the big number on the board. All right, since you teased that there's a story coming, what else is going on in your universe?
Today, Soccer Bar will be delayed all the way to 11:30 because of those same reasons behind the story that's going to be coming out. We will be at the training grounds today, talking to Brian Smetzer before Seattle does a very brief training session and travels to Columbus. So go ahead and check that out, both Pulso Sports and Soccer Bar. And again, sound it out hard. Within a couple of hours, you guys should be able to look at this story on Raul Ruiz and a little bit of an insight on what's going on there in Seattle.
Always, my friend, looking forward to it. May the deadlines be made, may the sources be correct, and may the stories be A-pluses. We'll catch up with you. We'll talk CONMEBOL and everything else on a full week coming up next time. Thanks for dropping by as always, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Nick. Thanks for the trust, man. And thanks to your audience always for listening to this poor guy here in the Pacific Northwest.
Who's on his second or third cup of coffee. That's usually how.
Oh, yeah. This is number 3, baby. This is number 3. Ooh, there it is.